The stone doors slammed open at midnight. 2 guards dragged a girl across the marble, and blood trailed behind her heels in a long, unbroken line. She did not make a sound. That was what silenced the court. Creatures who had lived 300 years, who had heard every plea ever spoken, had never heard a silence like that one. They threw her down at the foot of the dais. "Lift your head." She did not move. I said, "Lift your head." "Human." She lifted it. Slowly. Painfully. And the first thing the king saw was not fear. It was a bruise the size of a full hand, blooming across her cheek. Someone had dared to touch her. Before him. The temperature in the hall began to drop. Frost crawled up the glass. The nearest torch went out. Then the second. Nightfall did not fall on Ashgrave Castle. It never had. It never would. The sky above the obsidian towers had been black for 300 years, and the stars did not move, and the moon hung frozen like a wound that refused to close. This was the Shadowlands. This was Corvin's kingdom. A place where time did not pass, so much as accumulate, layer upon layer, century upon century, until a man forgot what sunlight felt like on his skin. He did not miss it. He told himself that every day. "Bring her to me." The words cracked through the throne room like a whip. Guards flinched. Actual, physical flinching, grown warriors, who had survived wars against werewolf clans, and border skirmishes, with the Iron Vale Kingdom, men who did not flinch at drawn steel. But they flinched at this. At him. King Corvin Ashgrave sat upon a throne carved from black stone older than memory, and his fingers, pale, long, elegant in the way that only the dead could be elegant, pressed into the armrest, until a hairline fracture spread beneath his palm like a vein of lightning. "Your Majesty." A guard bowed, so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. "Yes." Immediately. "I don't care what condition she's in." His voice was quiet now. Quieter than the shout. And somehow worse. "The girl who crossed into my territory. Who walked past 3 border wards, without triggering a single alarm. Who has made every guard in this kingdom look like a fool. Bring her to me. Now." 2 weeks. 2 weeks since the first report came in. A human girl. Wandering. Alone. In the cursed forest that marked the border between his world and hers. He had let his soldiers track her. Watch her. Wait. Because that was what a king did. He did not rush. He did not chase shadows through the trees like some lovesick fool in a children's story. He let the fear build in her bones first. Let her understand exactly what kind of world she had trespassed into. That was the plan. Except the plan had gone wrong somewhere. Because 2 weeks had turned into something else. Something he refused to name. Captain Caius Renwick stood near the door. Loyal. Steady. The kind of man Corvin had trusted, with his own life more times than either of them could count. "Your Majesty." Caius hesitated. "Perhaps we should." "Are you questioning me, Captain?" "No, sire." A beat. Never. But there had been a beat. And Corvin noticed beats. 300 years of ruling taught a man to notice the half-second pauses, where truth tried to escape, before loyalty dragged it back down. He filed it away. Later. He would think about that pause later. Right now there was only the throne room. The cold. The waiting. Humans did not wander into vampire territory. Not by accident. They came as spies. As saboteurs. As sacrifices sent by desperate human kingdoms still foolish enough to believe the old gods of the Shadowlands could be bribed with flesh. Whatever she was. Whatever her purpose. She would answer for it. He told himself that. Over and over. Like a man rehearsing a lie he needed to believe. They brought her in at midnight. Midnight meant nothing here, not really, not when every hour looked the same beneath a sky that never lightened. But the court had gathered anyway. Ancient things. Beings who had walked the earth since before the concept of nations existed. Beautiful. Terrible. Bored in the way that only immortals could be bored, a boredom so deep it had curdled into something closer to hunger. They came to watch. Crows circling a carcass that hadn't fallen yet. The massive doors groaned open. The prisoner, Your Majesty. 2 guards dragged something between them. No. Not something. Someone. Corvin leaned forward. Just slightly. Just enough that no one in the room would notice. Except he noticed it himself, and that was the problem, because kings did not lean forward for prisoners. Her feet scraped the marble. Her head hung low. Dark hair, matted, tangled, hiding whatever face lay beneath it. Her clothes were torn to ribbons across a frame that looked thin. Too thin. Closer, he said. Cold. Commanding. A voice built for exactly this moment. They threw her at the base of the dais. She hit the floor with a sound that landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. He did not like that it stayed there. Look at me. She didn't move. I said look at me. Human. Slowly. Painfully. She lifted her head. And Corvin forgot how to breathe. Which was absurd. Because vampires did not breathe. Not really. Not the way it mattered. But the memory of breath, the phantom ache of a body that had once needed air to survive, slammed into his chest like a fist. Her face. A bruise the size of his palm bloomed across her left cheek, swelling the eye half shut. Her bottom lip was split, crusted dark. More marks trailed down her throat. Her arms. Every visible inch of skin told the same story, over and over, in a language older than words. Someone had done this to her. Methodically. Thoroughly. Like a craftsman finishing a piece of work. But it was her eyes that undid him. Warm brown, flecked gold, even in the dead light of the throne room. And they held no fear. No pleading. Just exhaustion, the kind that came from a person who had already lost everything worth losing and had nothing left to beg for. She was the most striking thing he had seen in 3 centuries. And someone had dared to hurt her. The rage arrived like weather. Not the cold, calculated fury he wielded as a political weapon. This was different. Primal. Absolute. The temperature in the room dropped, so fast that frost spidered across the windows in seconds. Torches guttered. Died. Half the hall plunged into shadow. Who did this? A whisper. Barely audible. And somehow it reached every corner of the vast chamber like a scream. The guards shifted. Nervous. Caius stepped forward, jaw tight. Your Majesty. We found her already in this condition. She had. Who did this? The roar shook dust from the rafters. The girl flinched. First real reaction she'd shown. Fear, finally, cracking through the exhaustion. Corvin forced the rage back down his throat. Swallowed it whole. Because the monster underneath, the ancient thing that had slaughtered thousands, without blinking, wanted blood, and he could not let it out. Not here. Not in front of her. Answer me, Captain. Caius swallowed hard. When we found her in the Shadowlands, she was being held by rogues. Southern Territory defectors. They were, he chose his next words, with the care of a man walking across thin ice, amusing themselves. Before draining her. And where are they now? Dungeons, sire. We assumed you'd want to question them yourself. Corvin rose. He descended the dais, with a grace that belonged to nothing human, and the court parted before him the way water parts before a blade. He crossed the marble floor and stopped in front of the girl, who swayed where she knelt, trembling, fighting to hold herself upright through what looked like sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness. Close now. Close enough to see the shake in her limbs. Close enough to catch her scent. Blood. Sweet. Copper sharp. But underneath it, something else. Something that pulled at him on a level he did not understand, and did not want to understand. What is your name? His voice came out softer than he intended. He hated that it came out softer than he intended. She looked up, her gaze meeting his. And when she spoke, her voice was wrecked, the kind of rasp that came from screaming, until there was nothing left to scream with. Ren. Ren. He tasted the name like it belonged to him already. Who sent you here? A bitter smile cracked her split lip. She winced. Didn't care. No one sent me. I came looking for death. A pause. Guess I found it. The words landed strange. There was no deception in her face. No cunning. No spy's calculation, no sacrifices practiced fear. Just brutal, exhausted honesty. Why? The question left him before he could stop it. She swayed. Collapsed forward. He caught her. The moment his hands closed around her arms, something electric tore through the space between them. A jolt. A recognition. They both gasped, her breath ragged, his a sound he had not made in 300 years. Her skin was cold. Too cold for a living human. And in the half-second their eyes locked, Corvin saw it. The thing his kind whispered about in the dark, and never believed. Never truly believed. Because vampire kings did not have mates. He had lived 3 centuries, without feeling even a fraction of this. It had to be a trick. A curse. Some enchantment laid by an enemy clever enough to weaponize a myth. Except he was holding her now, feeling the faint stubborn flutter of her heartbeat against his chest, and he knew, with a certainty that terrified him more than any battlefield ever had, that everything in his long, bloody existence had been leading toward this exact moment. And someone had dared to brutalize what belonged to him. Captain Renwick. Yes, Your Majesty. The rogues in the dungeon. Bring them to the courtyard. Stake them for sunrise. A collective gasp rippled through the court. Death by sunlight. The cruelest end their kind could face. Reserved for the worst crimes his kingdom recognized. Consider it done, sire. Corvin looked down at the girl in his arms. Ren. Unconscious now, her body finally surrendering the fight it had waged for, who knew how long. He could feel every bone beneath her skin. Fragile. Too fragile. Fury and something dangerously close to tenderness collided inside him. Clear the room, he said. Now. 300 years of loyalty and fear emptied the hall in seconds. Even Caius retreated, though his expression carried a confusion that Corvin noted, filed away, and chose not to examine. Alone. He lifted her properly into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her through the castle's winding corridors, past tapestries depicting battles he had personally ended, past windows that framed the same eternal night they always framed. Servants pressed themselves flat against the walls, as he passed, eyes wide, watching their king carry a human like something breakable. Something precious. He brought her to his private chambers. No one entered these rooms. No one. The bed was draped in black silk. He laid her down as though she were made of glass, and in the candlelight her injuries looked worse, not better, the bruises darkening, deepening, her whole frame trembling, with a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. Shock. Blood loss. Damage he couldn't see. He had healers. The finest in every immortal kingdom, that still spoke his name with respect. But as he watched the shallow rise and fall of her chest, he understood, with the flat certainty of a man who had watched death arrive 1,000 times, that healers would not be fast enough. There was another way. A way that terrified him. Thrilled him. Both at once, which was its own kind of madness. His blood could heal her. It had power over human flesh, could mend wounds no physician could touch, cure sickness no medicine could reach. But it came bound to something else. A connection. If she was truly his mate, his blood would complete the first stage of a bond that could never fully be undone. She hadn't consented. She didn't even know what he was considering. The ethics of it should have stopped him cold. They didn't. Because her life force was flickering like a candle in a draft, and he had just found her, and he was not, could not, would not let her go out like this. He bit into his own wrist. Tore the vein open. Pressed it to her lips. Drink, Ren. A whisper. Lave. She woke to the absence of pain. For weeks, she didn't even know how many, time had stopped meaning anything days ago, there had been nothing but pain. Constant. Grinding. A permanent resident in every joint, every bruise, every breath. And now there was nothing. The sudden emptiness of it was so disorienting she didn't move. Didn't dare. As though moving might invite the agony back, might remind it where she'd gone. Eyes closed. She took inventory. Ribs that had been cracked. Whole now. Cuts and bruises that had covered her skin. Gone. Even the ache in her jaw, where one of the rogues had backhanded her hard enough to split something, vanished. What? What was happening? She opened her eyes. Black silk canopy above her. Beyond it, a ceiling painted, with stars that didn't belong to any sky she recognized. Not her ceiling. She hadn't slept under a real ceiling in weeks. Not the dank stone of the cell, where the rogues had kept her, laughing, taking turns, treating her like. No. Not now. Push it down. Bury it. She turned her head. And froze. He sat in a chair beside the bed. Watching her. Eyes that didn't blink often enough, that tracked her like she was the only moving thing in the world. He looked different than he had in the throne room. Less thunder. More something else. A word she didn't have yet. Dark hair fell across his forehead. In the candlelight his skin seemed to hold a faint glow, like something lit from underneath. He was, she realized with a jolt that felt almost like betrayal, one of the most striking things she had ever seen. Which was insane. Because he had ordered her dragged here to be executed. She remembered that part clearly. You're awake. His voice had none of the throne room in it now. How do you feel? She pushed herself upright. Her body obeyed. No protest. No pain. She looked down at her own arms. Smooth. Unblemished. Even the old scar on her wrist, the one from falling off a fence at 9 years old, the one that had followed her whole life, gone. What did you do to me? Fear crept into her voice no matter how hard she tried to keep it out. I healed you. He leaned forward. Elbows on knees. You were dying. I gave you my blood. Horror. Instant. Total. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. Vampire blood healed. Vampire blood also owned. What does that mean? What have you done? It means you'll live. His face gave nothing away. It means we need to talk. She scrambled backward on the bed. Suddenly aware, painfully aware, of how alone they were. How trapped. You're going to drain me. The words came fast, tumbling. That's why you healed me first. You wanted me strong. Healthy. Before you. I'm not going to hurt you. Sharp. Immediate. Then, softer. I'm not going to hurt you, Ren. The way he said her name sent something cold and electric down her spine. Intimate. Possessive. She didn't like it. She didn't like any of this. Then what do you want from me? He stood. Moved to the window. Looked out at a night that never ended. First. The truth. Why did a human walk into the Shadowlands? No one stumbles across that border by accident. Ren pulled the black silk sheet around herself. A flimsy shield against a vulnerability she hated. But she had nothing left to protect. Death had been the plan anyway. What did the truth cost her now? I came for the night market. He turned. Sharp. The night market is a myth. Something humans tell each other in taverns. No. Her jaw set. It's real. Once a year, in the Shadowlands. I spent 6 months chasing rumors. Bribing border guards. She met his eyes. Steady, despite everything. I came to buy something. Buy what? A life for a life. Her voice cracked on the last word. She hated that it cracked. My sister. Eloan. She has the wasting sickness. The healers say weeks. Maybe less. A breath. I heard the market could trade anything for anything. A life for a life. I came to offer mine. For hers. Corvin stared at her. A long moment. Long enough that she started to wonder if he'd stopped breathing entirely, which, she realized with a strange lurch, he probably had. You came here to die for your sister. Yes. And the rogues found you first. Her hands tightened on the sheet. The memories surged, unwelcome, uninvited. Laughter. Circling. The particular horror of being prey to something that saw you as both meal and entertainment. She shoved it down. Buried it deep, the way she'd learned to bury things. Yes, she whispered. Something dark moved across his face. Dangerous. How long did they have you? I don't know. Days. A week. She looked at him. Your guards saved me. Before they finished, Captain Renwick and his men interrupted their sport. His voice went cold again, that leashed fury simmering just under the surface. They brought you to me. To execute me. For trespassing. That was the plan. And now? She held his gaze. What's changed? I'm still human. I still crossed your border illegally. I assume that's still a crime. He sat back down. Heavily, for something that supposedly didn't tire. Everything has changed, Ren. And you're at the center of it. I don't understand. No. Quietly. You wouldn't. Not yet. A pause. Do you feel anything? Strange. Since you woke. She frowned. Took stock again, more carefully this time. And there, underneath the shock, underneath the fear, a warmth in her chest that hadn't been there before. A pull. Magnetic. Toward him, specifically, which made no sense at all. She'd chalked it up to gratitude. Or fear dressed up as something else. But it was more than that. Like a string tied, from her heart to his. I feel something. Reluctant. I don't know what it is. He nodded. Like he'd expected exactly that answer. My kind have a legend. Most of us think it's a fairy tale. We call it the mate bond. A connection that survives even death itself. It's said that even vampires, technically dead already, can find one soul that matches theirs. When they do, the bond locks into place. Permanent. Dread pooled low in her stomach. Why are you telling me this? Because when I caught you last night. When you fell. His eyes bore into hers, unblinking. It locked into place. You are my mate, Ren. The words hung in the air like a verdict. She laughed. Sharp. Bitter. Half hysterical. No. No, I'm human. This is a trick. I wish it were. Genuine frustration cracked through his voice. Do you think I wanted this? 300 years without a mate. Without a single weakness. And then you appear, broken, bleeding, and everything I built feels like it's balanced on the edge of a knife, because the idea of someone hurting you makes me want to burn the world down. That's not love. She shot back, fast, defensive. That's possession. I never said it was love. Softer now. The bond isn't love. Not at first. It's recognition. Your soul knows mine. Mine knows yours. A beat. What we build from that's up to us. She shook her head. Trying to process something that refused to be processed. I don't want this. Any of it. Neither do I, he said it plainly. No cruelty in it. Just fact. But we don't get a choice. The bond exists whether we accept it or not. Then I'll leave. Desperate now. Go home. Forget this ever happened, and you can. You'll die within a week. The words stopped her cold. What? He stood again, pacing, restless in a way that didn't suit a king. The bond, once formed, has to be maintained. We don't have to complete it, that requires turning you, which is a choice, and one I won't make for you. But we need proximity. Especially now, at the start. If you leave, the bond will fight to pull you back. You'll sicken. Waste away. So will I. You're lying. Her voice shook. You're trying to trap me here. Look inside yourself. He stopped in front of her. Close. Cold radiating off him like winter off a lake. Imagine leaving this room. Walking out of this castle. Traveling back through the Shadowlands. What does it feel like? Despite herself. Despite everything. She closed her eyes and pictured it. Pain lanced through her chest. Sharp. Sudden. The warm thread connecting her to him pulled taut, stretched to breaking, and her whole body screamed against the distance, before she'd even taken a single step. She opened her eyes. He was watching her with grim, weary understanding. I hate you, she whispered. I know. Silence, then. Long, heavy. Her eyes burned. She refused to let them fall. My sister. Finally. Small. She's still dying. I failed her. Something shifted in him. She watched it happen, a decision forming behind his eyes. What if you didn't have to? What do you mean? He seemed to war with something internally before answering. The night market was real. It doesn't exist anymore, I shut it down 50 years ago. Too many humans exploited, too many lives traded for the wrong reasons. A pause. But I'm the king. My blood already healed you. It could heal her too. Hope arrived, dangerous and painful, blooming in her chest, before she could stop it. You would do that. I have conditions. Of course he did. What do you want? Stay here. Give the bond 3 months to settle. If, at the end of that time, you still want to leave, I'll find a way to break it. It's possible. Difficult. Painful. But I won't keep you a prisoner. His eyes held hers. In exchange, I send my physician to your sister tonight. Enough of my blood to cure her completely. Why? She demanded it. Why offer this? What do you actually want from me? His laugh came out harsh. Almost self-mocking. Honestly? I don't know. The bond is clouding my judgment. Every instinct screams at me to keep you here. Protect you. Never let you out of my sight. A beat. But I've spent 300 years being a king, not a slave to feeling. So I'm trying to find middle ground. Your sister lives. You get a choice. And I don't lose my mind in the process. It was, she had to admit, more than fair. More than she'd expected from the vampire king who'd ordered her dragged before his throne 12 hours ago. The alternative was refusal. Leaving. Dooming her sister, and possibly herself in the same breath. 3 months. Slowly. And you heal her now. Tonight. Not at the end. I'll send someone within the hour. You have my word. The word of a vampire king. The word of your mate, he corrected. Which, whether you believe it yet or not, means something. She studied his face. Looking for the lie. Looking for the trick. But all she found was exhaustion that mirrored her own and a frustration that felt too real to be performance. He didn't want this either. That, at least, was something. Fine. A breath. 3 months. But I want the promise in blood. Since that seems to matter to your kind. A hard look. At the end of it, if I choose to leave, you help me break the bond. And you let me go. No tricks. No conditions. Corvin extended his hand. Agreed. A blood oath. She hesitated. Then placed her hand in his. Cold skin. But the moment they touched, the warmth in her chest bloomed into something dangerously close to pleasant. She ignored it. Or tried to. He produced a small knife from somewhere she hadn't seen him carry it. Cut across his palm. Offered her the blade. She did the same. Wincing at the sting. He pressed their bleeding palms together. Power surged through the contact. Electric. Binding. I, Corvin Ashgrave, King of the Shadowlands, swear on my blood that aid will reach your sister tonight, and that in 3 months' time, should you wish to leave, I will help you break this bond and release you freely. The words seemed to hang in the air. Glowing. Weighted with something older than either of them. I, Ren Calder, swear on my blood to stay 3 months. And give this bond a fair chance. The oath settled. The glow faded. He released her hand, and she watched the cut on her palm knit itself shut in seconds. His blood. Still working in her. I'll make arrangements for your sister tonight, he said, rising. Captain Renwick will need her location. Who cares for her? My physician will be discreet. Thank you. The words tasted strange in her mouth. She was thanking the vampire king, who had terrified her half to death 12 hours ago. Nothing made sense anymore. He moved toward the door. Paused. Ren. Without turning. The rogues who hurt you. They burn at sunrise. I wanted you to know. Good. She meant it fully. He nodded, something close to approval flickering across his face, and left her alone. Ren sat in the massive bed, surrounded by black silk and long shadows, and tried to understand what she had just agreed to. 3 months. With the vampire king. 3 months to survive a bond she didn't want and couldn't seem to deny. She touched her chest, where the warmth still glowed faint beneath her ribs, and refused to think about how right it had felt to hold his hand. Refused. And failed. Down in the lower halls, far from the private chambers, where the king kept his newest and only guest, Captain Caius Renwick walked alone. He passed a mirror. An old one, silver-backed, older than the wing it hung in. He stopped. looked at his own reflection for 1 second longer than a loyal man should need to. Then walked on. He did not look back at the door he'd just come through. He did not think about the girl behind it, or the bond the whole castle would be whispering about by morning, or the fact that he had personally led the rescue party that found her. Found her exactly where they'd been told she would be. He pushed the thought down. Buried it, the way soldiers learn to bury things that would otherwise cost them their heads. Far beneath the castle, in a chamber that no candle had lit in decades, a figure sat in darkness that even vampire eyes struggled to penetrate. A messenger knelt before them. Breathless. Human once, maybe, though it was hard to tell anymore. It's done, the messenger said. The girl is inside the castle. The bond has formed. Silence. Long considering. Then a voice, old, dry, patient in the way that only something ancient could be patient. Good. A pause. He's found his mate. Just like the last one. The messenger hesitated. The last one, my lord? 200 years ago. A soft, humorless laugh drifted through the dark. A different king. A different girl. Ended rather badly for both of them, as I recall. Another pause. Longer this time. Tell the others. It begins again. There are still enough of us who remember why the law was written in the first place. Enough of us who never stopped believing in it, whatever the council decides to call itself these days. The figure did not move from the shadows. Did not need to. Somewhere far above, in a room draped in black silk, a girl who had come to the Shadowlands looking for death touched the place above her heart and wondered, for the first time in weeks, if she might actually survive this. She had no way of knowing that surviving the mate bond and surviving the war being planned in the dark beneath her feet were about to become two very different problems. Neither did the king, who had just sworn to protect her. Neither of them heard the whisper drift up through the stone. Neither of them felt the old magic stir awake in corners of the castle that hadn't moved in 2 centuries. But it had started. The way these things always started, quietly, in the dark, long before anyone standing in the light understood what was coming for them. 6 weeks. 6 weeks since the blood oath. 6 weeks since a girl who had come to die found herself living in a castle with black silk sheets and a king who watched her like she might vanish if he blinked. Wren had her own chambers now. Smaller than his. Still grander than anything she'd known in her life, carved stone, tapestries older than her country, a wardrobe full of fabrics she couldn't name and didn't ask about. Servants who bowed. Freedom to roam most of the castle. Most of it. Not all of it. The Shadowlands are dangerous for humans, Corvin had told her, flat, final. Even with my blood in your veins. Every vampire for miles can sense this bond now. Some will respect it. A pause. Others won't. So she stayed inside the walls. And the walls, she was starting to realize, held more than she'd expected. Eloan was alive. That was the first thing. The only thing that mattered, really, when Wren let herself think about it too hard. Captain Renwick had delivered the news personally, the physician had gone, the blood had been given, and within hours her sister's color had come back. Her strength. Her voice. Eloan was asking where Wren had gone. Wren had written back. Told her she was safe. That she'd return soon. The lie tasted like ash every time she thought about it. I'm the maid of the Vampire King, bound to him by blood magic, and I don't know if I'm ever coming home. Eloan would think she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. So the letter said none of that. The letter said soon. Which was its own kind of cruelty, dressed up as kindness. Life in the castle found a rhythm. Which surprised her. Which she resented, a little, for how easily it happened. Because Corvin ruled during the day, or whatever passed for day in a kingdom with no sun. Disputes between vampire houses. Border reports. The endless, grinding machinery of politics that came with 300 years on a throne. But every evening, without fail, he came to find her. Sometimes dinner, though he never ate, just sat across from her, drinking something dark from a crystal glass that she'd stopped asking questions about. Sometimes the gardens, beautiful even under a sky that never brightened, flowers blooming in darkness like they'd never learned any other way to live. They talked. That was the part that undid her slowly, week by week. Because she'd expected a monster. Got something else instead. Sharp. Cynical. A dark, dry humor that surprised laughs out of her before she could stop them. He knew poetry. History. A dozen dead languages. He'd watched empires rise and fall the way other men watched seasons change. And he listened. When she talked about growing up poor, about a sick sister, and parents who'd stopped trying, about the fear that had driven her into a cursed forest, with nothing but rumors and a death wish, he listened like she was the only voice in the world worth hearing. The bond grew stronger. She felt it. A thread pulled tighter every day. Calmer when he was near. Restless when he wasn't, catching herself looking for him in rooms he hadn't entered yet, missing a presence she hadn't wanted in the first place. This was the trap, she realized. Not the oath. Not the walls. The trap was how easy it would be to fall. But the castle had other rooms. Rooms she wasn't invited into. And in one of them, a very different conversation was happening, one that had nothing to do with gardens or poetry. You broke the law. Nightfall Hall. High ceilings, colder than the rest of the castle, built for exactly this kind of confrontation. 9 council seats. 8 filled with beings older than nations. The 9th, the head seat, belonged to a man named Malric Voss. He did not sit. He stood at the center of the chamber like the room had been built around him specifically, which, Wren would later learn, it more or less had. You broke the law, Corvin. Voss's voice was dry. Patient. The patience of something that had been waiting 200 years to say this exact sentence. You know the statute. Article 7. No monarch of this court shall complete or pursue a bond with a human subject. I haven't completed anything. Corvin, seated on his throne, did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The bond formed. I didn't ask for it. I didn't choose it. Doesn't matter. Voss's smile was thin. The law doesn't care about intent, Your Majesty. Only outcome. Then change the law. A ripple through the council. Because you did not say that. Not out loud. Not in this hall. Voss's smile didn't move. The law exists for a reason. Which is? Because the last time a king of this court let himself believe a human bond could be harmless, Voss paused. Let it hang. Well. Ask your grandfather's court records. Oh. That's right. You can't. They were burned. Silence. Corvin's jaw tightened. Just barely. But Wren wasn't there to see it, she'd find out later, secondhand, from a servant, who whispered it like gossip, because that's exactly what it was. You have 3 months, Voss continued, turning it into ceremony now, drawing it out for the room. That was the oath. Very well. We will not interfere with an oath sworn in blood, even we respect that much, whatever you think of us. A beat. Sharper. But at the end of it, Your Majesty, this council expects the bond to be broken. Not completed. Broken. And if I refuse? Then we'll remind you, Voss said softly, why the law exists in the first place. And I should mention, Your Majesty, that this council's patience runs deeper than my own seat. There are those among us, and beyond this chamber, who have waited 2 centuries for a chance to finish what began the last time a king made this mistake. He didn't elaborate further. He didn't need to. The threat sat in the room like smoke, and everyone breathed it in, and nobody said another word until the council was dismissed. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the human side of the border. Corvin read it twice before he said anything. Halden. Caius, standing at the door, straightened. General Halden. Yes, sire. Words traveling fast. How fast? Fast enough that he's requesting an audience. Caius hesitated. He knows about the bond, Your Majesty. Corvin's expression didn't change. Which, Caius had learned over the years, was the version of Corvin that worried him most. Of course he does. Quiet. A vampire king and a human girl. That's not a rumor. That's a weapon, and Halden's smart enough to see it. You think he wants to use her? I think, Corvin said, folding the letter, with slow, deliberate care, that every man, with power in 100 miles is going to look at Ren and see a door. Some of them will want to walk through it. His eyes lifted. Cold. I intend to make sure none of them do. General Halden arrived under a flag of parley 2 weeks later. Tall. Gray at the temples. The kind of man who had survived 4 decades of war by never once mistaking mercy for weakness. He met Ren in the East Garden, arranged, technically, by accident, though nothing in that castle happened by accident anymore. So you're her. Halden studied her the way a soldier studies terrain. Looking for what could be used. What could be defended. The girl who walked into the Shadowlands to die. Word travels. Word always travels. A faint, humorless smile. You know what you are to my kingdom, don't you? Sitting where you're sitting? I'm not anything to your kingdom. Ren held his gaze, steady despite the churn in her stomach. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a hostage. I'm a person who made a promise to a sister. Everyone's a person, Halden said, not unkindly. Right up until they're useful for something else. He looked past her, toward the castle spires rising black against the frozen sky. I've fought this kingdom for 30 years, Miss Calder. Buried friends because of it. And now the vampire king has a human mate, and half my council thinks that's an opportunity, and the other half thinks it's a trap. A beat. I haven't decided which yet. Maybe it's neither. She said it before she'd fully thought it through. Maybe it's just 2 people caught in something bigger than both of them. Halden studied her a long moment. Something flickered behind his eyes, not quite respect, not yet, but the beginning of it. Maybe, he said. We'll see which one of us is right. He left without another word. And Ren stood alone in a garden that bloomed in darkness, wondering how many more people were going to look at her and see leverage instead of a girl who just wanted her sister to live. That night. The vulnerable one. The one that changed everything. She couldn't sleep. Walked the garden alone, past the black roses that opened only at what passed for midnight here, past the fountain that ran with water instead of blood, which she'd learned not to take for granted. She didn't hear the string draw back. She felt it. A whisper of air, wrong, out of place. Some old instinct, sharper now, since the blood, since the bond, screamed a half-second before the arrow would have found her throat. She dropped. The shaft passed close enough to cut a line of fire across her shoulder, before burying itself in the trunk of a tree that had stood in that garden for 200 years. Then Corvin was there. She never saw him cross the distance. 1 second the garden was empty except for her, and the arrow still humming in the bark. The next, he was between her and the dark, every line of him coiled and lethal. Stay down. She stayed down. The attacker didn't get a second shot. Corvin was faster than fear, faster than thought, and whoever had drawn that bow was on the ground, with a broken wrist, and a king's hand around their throat, before Wren had even caught her breath. Who sent you? Not a question. A demand carved from ice. The assailant said nothing. Corvin's grip tightened. Who? I don't, a gasp. I don't know his name. I was paid. That's all. Paid to kill her. To wound her. The assailant's voice cracked. Just wound her. That's what I was told. That's all. Corvin went very, very still. Because wounding wasn't an assassination. Wounding was a message. He looked down at the arrow still buried in the tree trunk. Pulled it free. Turned it over in his hands, and his expression, when he examined the tip, went colder than Wren had ever seen it. Silver, he said quietly. Laced with something else. He looked up at Caius, who had arrived at a dead run, sword already drawn. Holy water. Blessed silver. This isn't rogue work, Captain. This is council work. Caius's face didn't move. Didn't move at all, which, Wren would think later, replaying it, was its own kind of answer. I'll have the prisoner questioned, sire. See that you do. She didn't sleep that night either. Corvin sat with her instead, in her chambers, in a chair pulled close to the bed, watching the door like it might open on its own. You think it's Voss, she said. Not a question. I know it's Voss. Flat. The question is whether he ordered it directly, or whether he simply made it clear to certain people that such an accident would be welcomed. A pause. Either way. The message is the same. Which is? Break the bond, Corvin said, or he'll break you instead. The words sat between them in the candlelight, heavy as stone. I'm scared, Wren admitted. Small. Honest. The first time she'd said it out loud, since the throne room. I know. His voice, when it came, held none of the throne room's ice. I am too. She looked up, surprised. Vampire kings get scared? This one does. A ghost of a smile, gone as fast as it arrived. For the first time in 300 years. The investigation into the assassin took 4 days. 4 days that Corvin spent stalking the castle like a storm looking for somewhere to break. 4 days that Wren spent trying not to flinch every time a servant moved too fast near her. Then Caius brought the report. The assassin talked, Your Majesty. He didn't meet Corvin's eyes when he said it. Which, again, meant something. Wren was learning to read this castle in silences now, the way she'd once read weather. Paid through an intermediary. Untraceable, on the surface. On the surface. The coin was council minted, sire. Old stock. Not in general circulation for decades. Corvin's face went very, very still. How many people have access to council minted coin, Captain? 9, Caius said quietly. The council members. Anne. He stopped. And who else, Captain? Caius's throat worked. And their personal staff, sire. Which would include? Which would include you? The words landed like a dropped blade. Silence swallowed the room whole. Sire. Caius's voice had gone thin. I would never. Then explain, Corvin said, rising slowly from his seat, why a search of your quarters turned up 3 coins matching that mint. Wren, standing near the window, felt her stomach drop through the floor. Because Caius didn't deny it. He didn't say anything at all. They took him to the dungeons that night. Not executed, not yet, Corvin made that much clear, through gritted teeth, because a king, who killed his own captain on suspicion alone was no better than the council he was fighting, but held. Questioned. Watched. Wren visited him once. Against Corvin's wishes, which he voiced clearly, and which she ignored just as clearly, because some questions she needed answered by the man who'd asked them himself. "Why?" she said, standing at the bars. Caius sat in the dark, hands loose between his knees, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "Because you're going to get him killed," he finally said. Quiet. Not angry. Worse than angry, tired, in the way of a man who'd made peace with his own ruin a long time before this conversation. "You don't understand what you are, Ren. A weakness. A door the council's been trying to keep shut for 200 years, and he's holding it wide open because he's in love with the shape of it. So you tried to have me killed. Wounded." A flat, humorless correction. Just enough to scare you off. Just enough to make you leave before this got worse. He looked up at her then, and something in his face cracked, genuine, raw, the first honest thing she'd seen from him. "I've served him 300 years, Ren. I watched what happened the last time a king of this court loved a human. I was there. I'm the only one left who was there." Ren went very still. "What do you mean, the last time?" Caius's jaw tightened. Like he'd said more than he meant to. Like the words had slipped a leash he'd held for 2 centuries. "Ask him," he said, and turned his face away, and said nothing else no matter how many times she asked. She found Corvin in the star room. The highest tower, the one place in the whole castle, where the ceiling opened to something that almost looked like real sky, constellations no living human astronomer had ever charted. He didn't turn when she entered. He already knew it was her, the bond told him these things now, a small mercy in the middle of everything else. "He said there was a last time," Ren said, quiet, careful. "A king who loved a human. Before you." Corvin's shoulders went rigid. For a long moment he said nothing. Long enough that she thought he might refuse to answer at all, might carry it back down, into the dark the way he'd apparently carried it for 200 years. Then he spoke. Her name was Avellini. The words came out rough. Unpracticed. Like a door being forced open after decades of rust. "My grandfather's mate. 200 years ago." He stared out at the false stars like they might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. "He loved her the way a pause. A correction that never quite finished. He loved her completely. Broke every tradition of this court to keep her. And the council tolerated it. For a while." "What happened?" "She died. Flat. Final. Officially, an accident. A fall, they said. From a tower not unlike this one." He turned to look at her then, and his eyes held something ancient, and raw and furious, all at once. "Unofficially, my grandfather spent the last decade of his reign convinced the council murdered her. That Voss's predecessor gave the order himself, to protect the same law Voss is protecting now." Ren's blood went cold. "Did he ever prove it?" "No." A bitter, humorless breath. "He went mad trying. Abdicated. Vanished into the Shadowlands, and was never seen again. My father took the throne at 80 years old, and the entire court agreed, quietly, permanently, never to speak of Avellini again." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "Until 300 years later, when I did exactly what he did. Fell for exactly the wrong person. And apparently someone on that council remembered the pattern well enough to try finishing it before it started." Silence. The kind that pressed on the chest. "Corvin." Her voice shook. "If they killed her once, they won't get the chance again." He turned fully now, closing the distance between them, and for the first time, since the throne room she saw something in his face that wasn't a king's composure at all. It was fear. Raw. Unguarded. "I lost 300 years believing the mate bond was a fairy tale, because I watched what it did to my grandfather. What losing it did to him." His hand came up, cupped her face, cold palm against warm skin. I am not losing you the same way. You don't get to promise that. Her voice cracked despite herself. Not with a counsel that's already tried once. No, he agreed, quiet, fierce. But I get to fight for it. And I intend to. She should have pulled away. Every rational piece of her screamed to pull away, from the bond, from the danger, from a man who came with 2 centuries of political warfare stitched into his blood. She didn't. She rose onto her toes instead, and closed the last of the distance herself, and when he kissed her it wasn't gentle the way it might have been in some other story, some safer story. It was desperate. 2 people who had just realized, at the exact same moment, exactly how much they stood to lose. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, her more than him, obviously, though something in his chest heaved like it had forgotten it didn't need air, he pressed his forehead to hers. Say you'll stay, he whispered. Past the 3 months. Past all of it. Ask me again, she whispered back, after we survive whatever's coming. What was coming arrived faster than either of them expected. 3 nights later, Voss requested an emergency session of the council. Corvin attended alone. Wren was not permitted, which she fought and lost, because some battles even a king's mate couldn't win. Voss did not waste time on ceremony. Your captain has confessed, he said, and something in his voice carried a satisfaction he didn't bother hiding. Confessed to conspiring against the crown. Which is, I remind this council, a capital offense. He confessed to a coin found in his quarters, Corvin said, cold. Not to orders. Not to a source. Does it matter? Voss's smile was thin as a blade. A traitor in your own guard, your majesty. Working, by his own admission, to protect this kingdom, from a bond this council never sanctioned. One wonders, he added, almost lazily, whether Captain Renwick was truly acting alone. Or whether he simply understood something the rest of this court has been too polite to say aloud. Say it, then. Corvin's voice dropped to something dangerous. Stop circling it, Voss. Say it. Voss's eyes glittered. The girl is a liability, Corvin. She always was. And if you cannot see that clearly enough to protect this throne, this court will see it for you. The threat sat in the room like a drawn blade. Corvin held Voss's gaze for a long, silent moment. Careful, councilman, he said, quiet as frost forming. My grandfather lost his mind chasing the truth about Avellini. I don't intend to lose mine. A beat. But I promise you this. If I find proof, real proof, that this council had any hand in what happened to her, or any hand in what happened in my garden 3 nights ago. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The temperature in the hall dropped low enough that frost climbed the windows, and for once, even Malric Voss said nothing at all. Wren was waiting for him when he returned. Pale. Tense. She'd felt the whole confrontation, through the bond, she realized, not the words, but the shape of his fury, distant and sharp like a storm crossing far horizon. What happened? Nothing yet. He sank into a chair like the weight of 300 years had finally caught up with him all at once. Which is its own kind of answer. She knelt in front of him. Took his cold hands in hers. Corvin. If this is going to get worse, before it gets better. It is. Then I want to know everything. Steady, despite the tremor underneath it. Not pieces. Not what you think I can handle. Everything. Because I didn't come here to be protected from the truth. I came here to survive it. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face, old walls, 300 years thick, beginning, slowly, to come down. All right, he said finally. Everything. Outside, far below the tower, where they sat, in a chamber that no candle had lit in decades, a voice older than the castle itself listened to a report from a very anxious messenger, and said only a few words in response. Not yet. A pause. The captain failed. No matter. We have time. We have always had time. Let the king believe he's winning for a while longer. It makes what comes next so much more satisfying. And remind the others, patience has served us for 2 centuries. It will serve us a while longer still. Somewhere above, in a tower lit by false stars, a king and his mate held onto each other and did not yet know that the true battle hadn't started. They only knew that whatever was coming, it was coming for both of them, together or not at all. The message arrived 3 days after the council session. No seal. No courier. Just a folded slip of parchment left on Corvin's desk by someone who had walked through wards that should have stopped anyone without royal blood. He read it once. Then again. Because the first time, his mind refused to accept it. The peace summit will not happen. General Halden will not leave the Shadowlands alive. Neither will the girl. Neither, in the end, will you. A friend of the old order. Corvin set the parchment down very carefully. As though it might detonate if handled wrong. Then he called for Wren. She found him standing at the window of his study, the black glass reflecting a face gone carved from stone. She knew that face now. Knew what it meant. Tell me, she said. He handed her the note without a word. She read it. Read it again. Her hands, she noticed distantly, had gone very still, the particular stillness of fear too large to shake through. The summit is in 4 days, she said. I know. Halden's already traveling. If we cancel now. We can't cancel. Corvin's voice was flat. Controlled in the way that told her exactly how much control it was costing him. If we cancel, Voss wins without lifting a finger. Every human kingdom watching this border will see a vampire king too afraid to sit at a table. The peace dies anyway. Just slower. Uglier. So we walk into the trap. We walk into the trap. He turned from the window. Eyes hard as struck flint. But we walk in knowing it's a trap. That's the only advantage we have left. 4 days. 4 days to prepare for a battle nobody was supposed to know was coming. Corvin moved through the castle like a man rebuilding a fortress, with his bare hands, which, Wren realized, watching him, was more or less exactly what he was doing. Guards doubled. Wards reinforced by every sorcerer loyal enough to trust, with the truth. The dungeons, where Caius Renwick still sat in the dark, saw a visitor Corvin hadn't expected to make. Himself. I need you, Corvin said, standing outside the cell. Caius looked up. 3 weeks in the dark had hollowed something out of him, but his eyes were still sharp. Still present. I'm a traitor, sire. Remember? You're a man who made one terrible choice out of 300 years of loyalty. Corvin's jaw tightened. And right now, I need every blade I trust more than I need my pride. Voss is coming. At the summit. He's bringing everything he has. Caius rose slowly. Chains rattled, still fastened, still a question neither of them had answered yet. And you think I'd help you? After this? I think, Corvin said, that whatever you did it, because you were trying to protect this kingdom the only way you knew how. Misguided. Reckless. Nearly fatal. A pause. But not evil. I've met evil, Captain. I sat across a council table from it 3 days ago. You're not that. Silence stretched between the bars. If I fight for you, Caius said finally, quiet, and we survive this, what then? Then we figure out the rest of it. Corvin's voice softened, just barely. Together. The way it should have been, from the start. Caius looked down at his chained wrists. Then back up. Get these off me, he said. And point me at Voss. The night market's abandoned pavilions still stood at the border between the Shadowlands and the human territories, the one piece of neutral ground both sides still recognized, cracked stone arches overgrown with black ivy, a place that had once traded in miracles, and now traded in nothing at all except memory. This was where the summit would happen. This was where the trap was set. Corvin arrived with Wren at his side, against every instinct that screamed to leave her behind, but leaving her behind meant leaving her unguarded, and unguarded, in this particular week, was its own kind of death sentence. "You're sure about this?" she said quietly, as the pavilion came into view, torches lit along a colonnade that hadn't held light in 50 years. "No," Corvin said. "I'm sure about nothing. I'm sure I'd rather die beside you fighting than survive, without you hiding." General Halden was already waiting. Gray-templed, steady, flanked by a dozen of his own men, fewer than his rank would normally command, a deliberate gesture of good faith that Corvin noted and respected. "Your Majesty." Halden inclined his head. "Formal. Careful. Miss Calder." "General." Corvin's eyes swept the pavilion once, twice, cataloging every shadow. "We need to talk. Quickly. Before this summit turns into something neither of us intended." Halden's brow lifted. "You're worried about an ambush. I received a note 3 days ago promising you wouldn't leave this ground alive. Neither would she. Neither, eventually, would I." Corvin's voice was flat. "I don't know who sent it. I have a very strong suspicion." Halden went still. The soldier in him surfacing fast, sharp, assessing. "Your own counsel." "My own counsel." A long pause. Then Halden did something Corvin hadn't expected. He laughed. Short. Humorless. Bitter. "You know," he said, 30 years fighting your kind, and the thing that finally gets me is your politics." He shook his head. "All right. Talk fast, Your Majesty. What do you need from me?" "Trust," Corvin said. "Just for tonight. Whatever happens here, we're on the same side of it." Halden studied him a long moment. Then extended a hand. "For tonight," he agreed. "We'll see about the rest." They shook on it exactly, as the first arrow came screaming out of the dark. It took the throat of one of Halden's soldiers, before anyone had time to shout a warning. He went down, without a sound, and for one suspended, silent half-second, nobody moved at all, the whole pavilion frozen in the particular stillness that comes right before the world tears itself apart. Then Voss's forces came out of the ivy. Not rogues. Not disorganized rabble. Trained. Coordinated. Vampires old enough to remember empires that predated the country Halden's soldiers had sworn to defend, moving with a precision that told Corvin exactly how long this had been planned. Ambush. Halden's voice cracked across the pavilion like a whip. Shields. Form up. Steel rang against steel. Wren felt Corvin's hand close around her wrist, fast, hard, dragging her behind a fallen column even as the first wave crashed into the space where they'd been standing seconds earlier. "Stay down. Corvin. Stay down." He was already moving. Already gone, a blur of black cutting through the chaos, and Wren pressed herself against cold stone and tried, desperately, not to think about how many things in that fight could kill him and how few could kill her faster. The battle tore through the ruined pavilion like a living thing. Caius fought at Corvin's flank, chains gone, blade drawn, 3 weeks of confinement burning off in a fury that looked almost like penance. He took down 2 of Voss's soldiers back to back, spun, caught a third's blade an inch from Corvin's exposed side. "Even," Caius bit out, breathing hard. "We're even now." "We were never uneven," Corvin snapped back, driving his own blade through an attacker's chest. "You're an idiot, Captain. Not a det. Bad timing for a heart-to-heart, sire." Duly noted. Halden's forces held the eastern line, human steel and vampire strength colliding in a way that should never have worked together and somehow, in the desperation of the moment, did. Because a common enemy has a way of erasing 30 years of hatred faster than any treaty ever could. Ren watched from behind the column, heart slamming, and that was when she saw him. Voss. Standing at the pavilion's edge, untouched by the chaos, watching the battle unfold like a man reviewing an investment. Patient. Unbothered. Which was somehow more terrifying than anything charging through the melee with a blade. He saw her looking. And he smiled. Everything after that happened too fast to process in order. She would try, later, replaying it, and it would always come apart, into fragments, sound before sight, pain before understanding. Voss moved. Not toward the fighting. Toward Corvin. A blur too fast for human eyes, and Ren's scream tore out of her throat a full second, before her mind caught up to what she was screaming about. Corvin turned. Too late. Not too late to avoid the blade, he was faster than that, always faster than that, but too late to avoid what was hidden inside it. The blade caught his side. A shallow wound. The kind that should have healed in seconds. Except it didn't. Corvin staggered. Once. Twice. His knees buckled beneath him like something had reached inside his chest and cut the strings holding him upright. Holy silver, Voss said, almost gently, standing over him now. Blessed by 3 priests. Soaked in enough consecrated water to poison a king twice over. He crouched, studying Corvin's face, with something that might have been curiosity, might have been satisfaction. You should feel it working already, Your Majesty. It doesn't kill fast. That would be merciful. Voss. Ren was already running. Already screaming his name, and she didn't remember deciding to move, only that 1 second she was behind the column, and the next she was crossing open ground toward a battle that could kill her in half a heartbeat. Ah. Voss straightened, turning toward her, with an expression of mild, terrible delight. The girl who started all of this. Come to watch, then? How fitting. Get away from him. Or what? Voss tilted his head. You'll fight me yourself? A human girl, 3 months bonded, against a vampire older than your entire nation's founding? He laughed, soft and cold. Avellini tried something similar. 200 years ago. Do you know how that ended? Corvin's hand closed around Ren's ankle. Weak. Trembling. But there. Run, he rasped. Blood at his lips, dark, wrong. Ren. Run. No. That's not a request. I said a no. She dropped to her knees beside him. Ignored Voss entirely, which was its own kind of insult, and pressed both hands against the wound at Corvin's side. His blood, his cold, ancient blood, poured hot and wrong between her fingers. Don't you dare, she whispered, fierce, furious, terrified all at once. Don't you dare leave me after everything? Touching, Voss said, almost bored now. Truly. But irrelevant. He raised his blade again. The law exists for a reason, girl. I did try to explain that to him. Time slowed. Later, Ren would swear that was exactly how it felt, the whole pavilion narrowing down to one single, unbearable second, Voss's blade rising, Corvin too weak to move, and a decision arriving in her chest that she didn't remember making, so much as simply finding, already complete, already certain. She had 3 months to decide. She had about 1 second left to use it. Then let the law watch this, she said. And before Voss could ask what she meant. Before Corvin could rasp out another warning. Before her own mind could catch up and talk her out of it. She tore open her own wrist against the broken edge of the fallen column and pressed the wound to Corvin's mouth. Drink, she whispered, echoing words spoken to her once in a room draped in black silk, a lifetime and 3 months ago. Lave. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Corvin's eyes were glassy, distant, the poison dragging him somewhere she couldn't follow. Voss watched with something between horror and fascination, blade still raised, frozen by the sheer audacity of what he was witnessing. Then Corvin's hand closed around her wrist. And he drank. The bond, the thread that had lived quiet and warm in her chest for 3 months, ignited. It didn't feel like pain, exactly. It felt like being unmade, and remade in the same instant, every cell in her body rewritten by something older than language. She heard herself gasp. Heard, distantly, Voss's blade falter in his grip, because whatever was happening in front of him had clearly gone somewhere he hadn't planned for. Because the bond, completed at last, not by choice made in comfort, not by patient months of courtship, but by desperation and love colliding at the worst possible second, didn't just heal Corvin. It changed everything. Corvin's eyes snapped open. Something deeper flooding through them. Older. The poison in his blood burned away like frost meeting fire, and when he rose, and he did rise, faster than Voss could retreat, faster than anyone in that pavilion had ever seen him move, the air around him seemed to bend. You, Corvin said, voice gone to something that wasn't quite his own anymore, something ancient and furious and absolute, should have killed me properly. While you had the chance. Voss's composure cracked for the first time in 200 years. This isn't, the bond shouldn't be able to. She chose me. Corvin's hand closed around Voss's throat, before the councilman could finish the sentence. Freely. Completely. Which is the one variable your precious law never accounted for, isn't it, Voss? You built 2 centuries of tyranny on the idea that love makes a king weak. He lifted Voss off his feet. You were wrong. The battle broke like a wave hitting rock the moment Voss's soldiers saw their commander lifted bodily off the ground, thrown in a king's grip, power radiating off Corvin in visible waves that frosted the air around him. Some fled. Most simply stopped, weapons lowering, the fight draining out of them the way fights always drain out of soldiers who've just watched their side lose in a single, undeniable instant. Haldan's forces held their line, breathing hard, watching with the particular awe of men who'd just witnessed something they'd spend the rest of their lives failing to fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. Caius lowered his blade. Stared at Corvin. At Ren, kneeling now, pale, shaking, newly and irrevocably changed. Sire, he said, quiet. What do we do with him? Corvin looked down at Voss. At the councilman, who had ordered an arrow into a garden, who had planted coin in a captain's quarters, who had, Corvin understood now, with absolute cold certainty, very likely given the order 2 centuries ago, that ended his grandfather's reign, and his grandfather's mate in the same terrible year. He wanted to kill him. Every instinct, ancient and raw, screamed for it. We don't become him, Corvin said instead, low, and set Voss back on his feet, with a control that cost him visibly. Bind him. Bring him before the full council. Let them see exactly what their law protected. The council convened 3 days later, in the same cold hall, where Voss had once stood at the center of the room like he owned it. He did not stand at the center now. He knelt, bound in silver chain, flanked by 2 of Corvin's guards, and for the first time in 200 years, Malric Voss said almost nothing at all. Corvin stood before the remaining 8 seats. Ren beside him, vampire now, the change still settling into her like a tide finding its shoreline, her eyes gone to something deeper, something that would never quite lose their warmth no matter what else changed. 3 weeks ago, Corvin said, voice carrying to every corner of the hall, this man tried to have my mate murdered in my own garden. When that failed, he planted evidence against my most loyal captain. When that failed, he orchestrated an ambush at a peace summit that would have killed a human general, my mate, and myself, all in a single night, and blamed it, I imagine, on rogue elements too dead to argue otherwise. He let that settle. Let it land on 8 faces that had spent 2 centuries deferring to the man now kneeling on cold stone. I have something else to say. His voice dropped, and something old and raw moved beneath it. 200 years ago, my grandfather's mate died. Officially, an accident. Unofficially, my grandfather believed, until the day he lost his mind, that this council murdered her to protect the very law Voss has spent his tenure enforcing. He looked directly at Voss. I want to know the truth. Now. Before this council. Did you give that order? Or did your predecessor? Silence. Voss's jaw was tight. His eyes, when they finally lifted, held something that might have been the last shred of 2 centuries of pride refusing to break even now. My predecessor, he said finally, flat. I inherited the policy. I did not invent it. A beat. I merely believed, as he did, that the law existed for good reason. That a king ruled by love instead of reason was a king, who would eventually get his entire court killed protecting one fragile life. His eyes flicked to Ren. I still believe that. Then you're a fool, Corvin said, who mistook control for wisdom for 200 years, and it cost this court a queen it never got to know. He turned to the remaining council seats. I am not asking for Voss's death, he said. Killing him makes me exactly what he claims to fear, a king ruled by rage instead of judgment. I am asking this council to strip him of his seat. Permanently. And I am asking this council to formally abolish Article 7, so that no future king of this court has to fight the same battle I nearly lost my life fighting tonight. The council members exchanged glances. Long, weighing, ancient glances that carried the particular slowness of beings, who measured decisions in decades rather than minutes. Then, one by one, they nodded. Voss was stripped of his seat before dawn. Exiled to the furthest reaches of the Shadowlands, stripped of council protection, permitted to live, a mercy Corvin insisted on, and privately questioned more than once in the months that followed. Article 7 was struck from the law that same night. 200 years of silence, broken in a single vote. Caius Renwick was reinstated as captain of the guard, not without a formal reprimand, not without a year of probation that he accepted, without complaint, but reinstated all the same. He would spend the rest of his long life, Corvin suspected, quietly making up for the 3 weeks he'd spent believing fear was the same thing as loyalty. But the peace that followed did not feel finished. It felt, to anyone paying close attention, like the surface of something deeper still settling. Because 200 years of belief did not end, with one exile, however satisfying that exile looked, from the outside. Voss had built his following slowly, patiently, across generations, and a man does not spend 2 centuries at the center of a doctrine, without leaving roots behind him wherever he goes. Ren felt it first, 3 months after the summit. The bond had changed, since that night, sharper now, more attuned, a vampire's senses layered over whatever instinct had once been merely human. She woke one night, with her hand already reaching for a blade that wasn't there, some old alarm ringing in her blood, before her mind had caught up to why. Corvin. He was already awake beside her. Had been for longer than she realized. I feel it too, he said quietly. Something's moving in the lower halls. They found the note the next morning. Pinned, this time, to the door of the council chamber itself, a location that should have been impossible to reach, without triggering every ward Corvin had rebuilt, after the assassination attempt. Voss was patient. We are not. The old law does not die because you struck it from a book. It dies when every believer is gone. The faithful. Corvin read it in silence. Then handed it to Caius, whose jaw tightened the way it always did now, when something threatened the peace he'd nearly cost them. There are more of them, Caius said. Not a question. There are always more of them. Corvin's voice carried the particular weariness of a man who had hoped, however briefly, that one battle might have been enough. 200 years of doctrine doesn't die with one exile. I should have expected this. Some part of me did. Ren stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the frozen dawn that never quite arrived over the Shadowlands. How many are we talking about? Unknown. Caius's expression was grim. Could be a handful of loyalists too stubborn to accept the vote. Could be something larger. Voss had 2 centuries to build a following, sire. We only just found the surface of it. Then we find the rest, Corvin said. Before they find us first. The investigation took weeks. Careful, quiet weeks, because a public hunt would only drive the remaining loyalists deeper underground, and Corvin had learned, at considerable cost, that some enemies needed to be drawn out rather than chased. Ren proved, in this, more valuable than anyone expected. Because she wasn't only a mate now. She was a bridge, human-born, vampire maid, trusted in equal measure by Halden's soldiers, and Corvin's court, moving through spaces neither side alone could reach. She sat with servants who'd overheard things in the lower halls. She walked the border markets, with Aloan, listening for names spoken too carefully, silences held too long. It was Aloan, in the end, who found the first real thread. There's a merchant, she said one evening, breathless from the ride back, through the border pass. Sells silver in the human markets near the old night market ruins. Every purchase this month, paid in council-minted coin. Old stock. The same as? The same as the coin found in Caius's quarters, Ren finished, already moving toward the door. They tracked the coin to a cellar beneath an abandoned tannery 3 miles from the border, a nest of Voss loyalists numbering closer to 30 than the handful Caius had hoped for, armed, patient, and led by a woman none of them had ever seen before. Her name, they'd learn, was Yold. A councilwoman's daughter, 2 centuries dead by any official record, it turned out, in secret, decades before Voss's own tenure began. A relic of the old order kept hidden precisely, because the law she believed in had already begun to rot even in Corvin's grandfather's time. You think striking one law from a book changes anything, Yold said, when Corvin finally stood before her in that cellar, torchlight throwing long shadows across 30 armed loyalists, and one very tired king. You think a vote undoes 2 centuries of belief. I think, Corvin said, that belief built on murder doesn't deserve the word belief at all. Careful, Your Majesty. Yold's smile was thin, ancient, unbothered. Your grandfather said something similar once. Right before Avellini fell from that tower. The room went very still. Ren felt Corvin's hand tighten at his side, not fear, not quite, but something close enough to recognize. You were there, he said, low. 200 years ago. I was many places, Your Majesty. Some of them tower balconies at midnight. Yold's eyes glittered. The law existed for a reason. It still does. And it will exist long after you're gone, one way or another. The battle that followed was smaller than the summit, 30 loyalists against a dozen guards, no ambush, no element of surprise, just desperate people defending a doctrine they'd built their entire lives around. It ended faster than anyone expected, not because it was easy, but because 30 people, who believed in a dead law couldn't match a king, and his mate, who believed in a living one. Yold was the last to fall, cornered, blade broken, breathing hard in a way that vampires rarely needed to. Kill me, she said, when Corvin stood over her with his sword still raised. Finish it. Prove the old law right one final time. Corvin looked down at her for a long moment. Then he lowered the blade. No, he said. Because that's exactly what you want. A martyr. A story to keep the rot alive another 200 years. He turned to Caius. Bind her. Bring her before the council, same as Voss. Let her stand trial in the light instead of dying in a cellar in the dark. That's the difference between the old order and whatever we're building now. Yold's laugh was bitter, hollow, but something in her eyes, just for a moment, looked almost like respect. You really believe that, she said. Don't you? I have to, Corvin said quietly. Or none of this meant anything. The trial took a full council session. Yold said little in her own defense, offered no names, no further threats, simply sat in silence, ancient and unmoved, while the council debated her fate. In the end, she was exiled alongside Voss, stripped of any remaining influence, sent to the same forgotten edges of the Shadowlands, where two relics of a dying philosophy could keep each other company in the dark. The cellar's loyalists scattered or surrendered. No more notes arrived. No more arrows found gardens. The peace, this time, held not because the threat was fully gone. Corvin doubted it ever would be, not completely, not after 2 centuries of roots grown that deep, but because the kingdom had proven, twice now, that it would survive whatever tried to break it. 6 months after Yold's exile, the council called for something the Shadowlands hadn't seen in 300 years. A coronation. Not for Corvin, he'd worn the crown, since before Ren was born. This was different. This was for her. You don't have to do this, Corvin told her, the night before, both of them standing in the star room, where so much of their story had already unfolded. The council can't force a formal coronation on you. If you'd rather remain simply. Corvin. She took his hands, steady now in a way she hadn't been steady, that first terrible night in the throne room. I walked into this kingdom broken, half dead, expecting to be executed by sunrise. I fought a councilman, who tried to kill me twice. I gave up my own blood to save your life in the middle of a battlefield. A small, fierce smile. I think I've earned a crown. He laughed, that rare, warm laugh she'd learned to treasure, and pulled her close. You earned it the moment you looked at me in that throne room and showed no fear, he said. The crown's just catching up to the truth. The coronation was held in the same hall, where Voss had once stood at the center of the room like he owned it. This time, the room belonged to no one man's fear. Haldan attended, the first human general in living memory to stand inside the Shadowlands not as an enemy or a hostage, but as a guest of honor, flanked by an honor guard that included soldiers who'd fought back to back with vampires at the ruined pavilion months before. Eloan stood near the front, radiant, unable to stop smiling, Caius close beside her in a way that had finally, quietly, stopped being a secret anyone bothered pretending not to notice. Ren wore black, the way the court demanded, but Corvin had insisted on one addition, a thread of deep autumn gold woven through the fabric, echoing the color of eyes that had once looked up at him from a throne room floor and held no fear even when they had every reason to. The crown was old. Older than Corvin. Older, some said, than the kingdom itself. He placed it on her himself. Ren called her, he said, voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall, once a stranger to this court. Now it's queen. Chosen not by blood, not by birthright, but by every choice she made, when choosing the easier path would have cost her nothing at all. The hall erupted, not the polite, restrained applause of ancient formality, but something warmer, louder, the sound of a court that had genuinely, finally, learned to feel something besides boredom and fear. Ren looked out at the gathered faces, vampire and human both, standing together in a room that had once nearly become her tomb, and felt the bond in her chest settle into something that finally, completely, felt like home. The 2 years that followed passed the way years pass in a kingdom, where time accumulates instead of racing forward, steadily, quietly, each one leaving its mark. Eloan thrived in the castle, fully recovered, apprenticed to Corvin's physician, with a talent that surprised everyone except her sister, who had never doubted it for a second. The treaty between the Shadowlands and Haldan's kingdom held, fragile at first, treaties born from ambushes, and near death always were, but it grew stronger month by month, through the tireless work of a former human girl, who now understood both sides of the border better than anyone alive. Ren negotiated trade routes. Settled disputes. Sat, more often than not, at Corvin's side during council sessions that no longer needed to fear the ghost of Article 7 hanging over every decision. She found him one evening in their shared chambers. They'd stopped pretending to keep separate rooms sometime around month 4 of that first year, a fact that had scandalized exactly no one who'd been paying attention. reading reports by candlelight, exactly as he'd been doing the night she first arrived, bruised and broken, and certain she was about to die. "How was the council meeting?" he asked, not looking up. "Productive. Lord Asheville is still insufferable, but even he agreed the new trade routes make sense." She crossed the room, set aside her own scrolls, and settled into his lap the way she'd learned to do, without thinking, the bond between them no longer a question anyone needed to ask. "How was your day?" "Long, tedious." A small, genuine smile. "Better now." They sat in comfortable silence a moment before she said, quiet, thoughtful, "I've been thinking about the law. About what nearly happened to us. Dangerous topic. I mean it." She turned to look at him properly. 200 years, Corvin. 200 years of a law built on one man's fear, and it nearly killed us both, before anyone thought to question it. I don't ever want this kingdom to build another wall like that. Not out of fear. Not out of anything. Corvin was quiet a long moment, turning her words, over the way he turned, over every serious thing she said to him, slowly, carefully, giving it the weight it deserved. "Then we won't," he said finally. "We'll build something else instead." "Like what?" "Like a kingdom," he said, "that remembers what it nearly lost. And chooses, every single day, not to lose it again." She leaned her head against his chest, a heartbeat there now, steady, hers, changed but never lost, and thought about a girl who had walked into a cursed forest looking for death, and found, instead, an entire life she'd never imagined wanting. That conversation became something like a promise the two of them kept quietly for years afterward. Eloan and Caius married in the same garden, where an assassin's arrow had once nearly ended everything, a detail that struck several of the older courtiers as either deeply poetic or deeply reckless, depending on who was asked. Eloan had, by then, become one of the finest physicians the Shadowlands had seen in a century, her particular gift for healing magnified, some whispered, by whatever strange blessing had once saved her from the wasting sickness in the first place. Halden retired from his general's post 2 years after the coronation, replaced by a younger officer who had grown up hearing stories about the peace summit that nearly became a massacre and became, instead, the foundation of the longest stretch of calm the border had known in 3 centuries. Halden himself became something rarer, an old soldier who spent his final years as an unofficial advisor to a court he'd once sworn to destroy, invited to sit at council sessions not as an enemy managed, but as a friend consulted. The trade routes Wren had first negotiated as a fledgling, uncertain mate grew into something larger, full exchange between the human territories and the Shadowlands, healers trained on both sides of the border, children of mixed heritage no longer treated as scandal or weapon, simply as what they were. Voss died in exile, eventually, the way old things eventually do even when they refuse to. Word reached the castle quietly, without ceremony. Corvin said nothing when he heard. Wren found him later, that night in the star room, staring at nothing in particular, and simply sat beside him until he was ready to speak. "I thought I'd feel something," he said finally. "Satisfaction. Relief. Something. What do you feel instead?" "Nothing," he admitted. Which might be the most honest kind of justice there is. He spent 200 years making himself the center of every story in this kingdom. In the end, his death barely made a ripple. A pause. The kingdom moved on without him. That's a better ending than anything he ever gave Avellini. On the 5th anniversary of the night a broken, bruised girl was dragged before a throne expecting execution, Corvin and Wren stood once more in that same throne room, empty now, quiet, the candles long since replaced 100 times over, but the black stone throne unchanged. "Do you remember what you said?" Corvin asked, "when I asked why you'd come to the Shadowlands?" "I told you I came looking for death." Wren's smile was soft, a little sad, the way old memories always carried a trace of sadness even when the ending was good. "And I found it." "Sort of. You found something else instead." "I found you." She turned to face him fully, her eyes as warm now, as they'd been exhausted then. I found a kingdom worth fighting for. A sister who's happier than I ever dreamed she'd be. A crown I never asked for, and wouldn't give back for anything. She reached up, cupped his face the way he'd once cupped hers in this very room. I came here to trade my life for hers. I never imagined I'd end up building an entire life instead. Corvin pressed his forehead to hers, the way he had, that first impossible night, and the bond between them, older now, deeper, tested by war and loss and 5 years of building something neither of them had believed possible, settled into the quiet certainty of two people who had chosen each other over and over, long after the choosing stopped being difficult. 300 years, he murmured, and the best decision I ever made was ordering my guards to bring a trespasser before my throne. Careful, Ren said, smiling against his lips. That's practically romantic, for a vampire king. Don't tell the council, he said. I have a reputation to maintain. She laughed, bright, unguarded, the sound echoing off obsidian walls that had once only known fear and command, and outside, beyond the frozen windows, the eternal night of the Shadowlands stretched on exactly as it always had. Except it wasn't the same kingdom anymore. It never would be again. Because a girl who came looking for death had taught an ancient, blood-stained court something it had spent 3 centuries forgetting how to believe. That love, chosen freely, cost more than any law ever could. And was worth paying every single time.